questions right now, and doesn't look like we have any. So what I'd like to do is go immediately now to Janine Fear, who will take over, and Janine is going to do the rest of the presentation here. She's from CDM Smith, and as I said, a major editor of this handbook. And with that, I'm going to ask Janine that she take away my keyboard and mouse control so she can take over completely, and I can sit back.
All right, I've done that. Hello everyone, my name is Janine Fear, and today what I'm going to do is walk you through the Chapter 3 of the Transportation Site Impact Handbook. And I'm also, while going over this chapter, going to go over all the legislative changes that occurred this summer that basically impact certain portions of this handbook as well. Chapter 3 goes over several topics in regard to growth management and transportation planning, as you can see on the slide before you. What we'll cover today is several sections that are found within Chapter 3, and they'll be appearing on screen as I talk. Basically, Chapter 3 goes over comprehensive plans and comprehensive plan reviews. It will also go over the statutory requirements for which impact not only the elements but how comprehensive plan amendments are developed and looked over. And we'll also look at different types of comprehensive plan amendments that you'll see, as well as concurrency alternatives. So, Chapter 3 is set up to first provide guidance. Chapter 3 is first set up to provide guidance regarding comprehensive plan amendments and concurrency alternatives. Each section within Chapter 3 provides a brief introduction of those concepts for specific topics, and then gives more additional detail to help reviewers as well as interested parties to understand different topics like sector plans, rural land stewardship area, things like that. Within each section of Chapter 3, you're going to find several hyperlinks that Gary was talking about. Those hyperlinks are there for you to help as an additional learning aid, just in case you have additional specific questions regarding certain topics. Now, at the end of Chapter 3, you're going to notice that there are several resource guides. These resource guides are available to you as additional aids as well to help you understand certain topics in regards to legal authority. For example, what is the legal authority to look over future land use map amendments? What is the legal authority to look at concurrent transportation concurrence, things like that. Resource guides also talk about different online resources available through DOT and DEO regarding a plan amendment review. And finally, we're going to have a checklist to go over what's called future land use map amendments. Now, what you see before you is an example of the checklist for the Future Land Use Map Amendment Resource Guide. I'm just showing you this as an example of what type of things you'll find at the back end of this chapter. You can see on the slide for the checklist, it first talks about whether you look at whether the amendment correctly identifies the study area as well as what type of impacts this amendment might have. We will assess further in the presentation regarding future land use map amendments, what they are, and what elements they impact. Are there any questions in regards to the overall setup of Chapter 3 or what we're about to go over today?
Janine, this is Gary Socolow. I've seen no questions on the material yet, but a few people have noticed that your microphone is cutting in and out, and I have two suggestions that I've known in the past of, I don't know if your smartphone is near you and on. Sometimes, believe it or not, it causes interference. And the other is if you turn off your cell phone, your smartphone, and it doesn't get any better, we might ask you to call back in. So let's see how that goes.
All right, I'll do that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving forward, we're going to tackle the first section of the handbook underneath Chapter 3, which is a general introduction into comprehensive plans and plan amendments. Now, you might want to know what a comprehensive plan is. Comprehensive plans are framework documents which provide goals, objectives, policies which reflect the vision of a local government. Each local government within the state of Florida is required to have a comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plan. So I was just briefly saying what has happened with 2011. In regards to what comprehensive plans do, they give a vision for a local government, usually between 10 to 20 years. Now, some comprehensive plans could have multiple planning timeframes, and that could depend on various pieces of the elements within the plan having different planning horizons. Like, for example, sector plans, which we will talk about later in this presentation, usually have different planning time horizons than the actual comprehensive plan they're adopted into. Some can have planning horizons for 50 years. One or two, I remember off the top of my head, actually have planning horizons for 100 years. So these are documents that are generally trying to understand what the community wants and what the community sees itself into the future. In general, there is a bare minimum of 8 major elements for inland counties in their comprehensive plans and 9 major elements for coastal counties. And that's because there's an extra element called coastal management element required for counties that are along the coast. All elements within a comprehensive plan are required by state law to be internally consistent with each other, as well as consistent with specific statutes identified in the handbook under Chapter 163, Part 2, Florida statutes. Now, of the major elements that I was just generally talking about, we're going to hit upon 3 throughout this entire presentation. That is the future land use element, the transportation element, and the capital improvement element. Now, as Gary was alluding to earlier, prior to 2011, the State Land Planning Agency, which was the Administrative Growth Management for the state, was known as the Department of Community Affairs. After 2011, the Department of Community Affairs became part of what is now the Department of Economic Opportunity. So when I refer to State Land Planning Agency, that's the Department of Economic Opportunity. They are now the ones that administer growth management for the state of Florida. So for the rest of this presentation, in terms of the State Land Planning Agency, I'm going to refer to them as DEO. Now, DEO is not the only state agency that is involved with growth management. There are others such as FDOT that's also involved. And FDOT is involved from the transportation planning side of it. Under Section 163-3184 of Florida statutes, it defines all of those agencies such as FDOT that would be coordinating with DEO in terms of comprehensive planning. FDOT has a published procedure, procedure number 525-010-101-D, that covers the review of comprehensive plans for SDOT staff. Now, this procedure identifies areas of focus for DOT comprehensive plan reviewers, as well as identifies coordination and submission procedures for DOT reviewers in regards to working with DEO on comprehensive plan amendments. Currently, this procedure is going through revisions to update it to the current growth management legislative changes that are going through right now, well, that have been adopted. Section 3.2 of this handbook then goes into the comprehensive plan amendment process. Now, I've been using the word amendment pretty freely throughout this presentation so far. In order for a comprehensive plan to change, you have to amend the plan. Comprehensive plans were never meant to be static documents. In order for a comprehensive plan to be amended, you have to go through the comprehensive plan amendment process, which is a state review process for comprehensive plan amendments. Now, prior to 2011, there were only two ways in which a comprehensive plan was reviewed by the state. One is what I'll call the regular comprehensive plan amendment review process. And another, which you'll go into a little detail later, that is not very big on our radar. It's a small-scale comprehensive plan amendment review. After 2011, the regular comprehensive plan amendment review was taken out of statute and replaced by two new processes: expedited state review and a state coordinated review. And so now you notice that we have three amendment review processes for comprehensive plan amendments in the state. So it might get confusing. Which one is applicable to the amendment that you're looking at? We'll start off with looking at state coordinated review. State coordinated review, and I'll go into this a little bit more detail on its slide later on, is the most reminiscent of the original comprehensive plan review process prior to 2011. And it's really intended for plan amendments that can have significant impact on important state resources and facilities in terms of an amendment for one city impacting several neighboring cities, to impacting regional resources, or even impacting the state. So currently, there are 6 types of comprehensive plan amendments that would go underneath the state coordinated review process. Plan amendments such as those are in areas of critical state concern. And areas of critical state concern are those areas designated to protect important state resources, just like the Big Cypress in Collier County, or Green Swamp in Lake and Polk counties. You also have to do this for rural land stewardship areas. These are also areas that we'll go into later on are for massive planning, long-range planning. These are areas that are typically 10,000 acres or more. Another is sector plans. And sector plans is kind of like a new kid on the block. And we'll talk more in detail about them later on in this presentation. A new thing that you'll see on the end of this, number 3, is or an amendment to an existing sector plan. In 2015, it was added that if you amend a sector plan that is in a comprehensive plan, it must also go underneath state coordinated review. Another thing which is kind of new is development of regional impact. Now, I'm using the term development of regional impact because that's a term that everyone on this call most likely recognize. Now, really how it's phrased that within the statute right now is development that could qualify as developments of regional impact, because the review process for developments of regional impact has changed in the 2015 legislative session. We'll talk more about this later, but I just want to bring this up to you guys right now. Another type of amendment that would go under state coordinated review would be changes to the comprehensive plan from an evaluation and appraisal review. These changes are usually pretty massive changes that change sometimes the entire scope of a comprehensive plan. And we'll go over that later in regards to what kind of things that could change to a comprehensive plan because of an evaluation and appraisal review. And finally, if a new municipality popped up in Florida, they have to make a new comprehensive plan as required by statute, and that would also go underneath the state coordinated review process. Now, the other two review processes mentioned, expedited state review and small scale. With expedited state review, basically anything that is not identified as small scale or state coordinated review falls underneath expedited state review. And the small scale amendments are those amendments that are typically 10 acres or less, and there's usually a cap of 120 acres per local government. We'll go into these in a little bit. Now let's talk about expedited state review process. This is a very new review process since 2011. So what is it? Local governments must submit their proposed amendments to DEO and other reviewing agencies, including DOT. Once the proposed amendment package is considered complete by DEO, a clock begins, and all reviewing agencies have 30 days to submit their comments to the local government. Now, it's a little different for agencies such as DOT, DEP, and what have you, because not only are they submitting their comments to local governments, they're also submitting their comments to DEO. So just keep in mind of that. But like I said, they have to have their comments into the local government 30 days after receipt by DEO of the proposed comprehensive plan amendment. Once the local government receives what's called comment letters from the state agencies, they must look at the comment letters and determine how to fix their amendment in response to the comment letters. Now let me take a step back because I realized I didn't define what a comment letter is until now. So during the 30 days in which DEO and the other reviewing agencies are reviewing the proposed amendments, they have to develop what's called a comment letter. Now, the comment letter doesn't always have to identify issues. A comment letter could be what's called sometimes a clearance letter, in which it identifies no issues with the comprehensive plan amendment. But every agency who are reviewing the amendment must submit a comment letter whether or not they have issues to the local government within 30 days. After receiving comment letters, the local government must then address any comments that are raised, particularly those that have anything to do with compliance. And now when I'm talking about compliance, I'm talking about any issues raised that have a legal authority within Florida statute that must be addressed by the local government to ensure that it's still compliant with state laws. Because comment letters can have two types of comments. Ones that are for compliance and others that are for technical assistance, like helping a government clarify policies to make it easier to read or things like that. After the local government addresses comments, they must submit their adopted amendment that address the comments submitted by state agencies to DEO and those reviewing agencies that submitted comments. Then within 30 days of receipt, DEO must determine if the adopted comprehensive plan amendment is compliant with state law. If it is, then the amendment will get what's called a notice of intent, and it's considered effective 30 days after receipt by DEO. No, 31 days. My apologies. Now, a problem can come up if a local government does not comply with all the comments, particularly comments that are of the issue of state compliance. If a local government does not comply with those type of comments, DEO can challenge the adopted amendment. Two things can happen when DEO challenges the amendment. One thing is that the local government will come back, enter into a compliance agreement with DEO, and produce what's called a remedial amendment that will address those comments that they did not address during their adoption process earlier. Another thing that could happen is that the local government could just withdraw the amendment completely and just start over. Now, with state coordinated review, as I mentioned earlier, it is the most similar to the original comprehensive review process that we had prior to 2011. And that is a bit different than the expedited state review process. Now, instead of just only 30 days for review for everything to occur, we have a 60-day time frame. And that's within that 60-day time frame, SDOT and other reviewing agencies have 30 days to submit their review comments to DEO, not to the local government, to DEO. Then DEO will take the comments from reviewing agencies and as well their own comments and create what's called an objections, recommendations, and comments report. The purpose of the objections, recommendations, and comments, or ORC report, is similar to that of the comment letter and expedited state review, and that is supposed to relate to the local government issues of compliance, how to rectify those issues, as well as any other technical guidance comments identified by the reviewers. Now, the only difference between, one of the main differences between the ORC report and a comment letter is the rigorous review behind the ORC report. Since, as I discussed earlier, these are typically for amendments that would have greater impact on state resources. And for example, for amendments that would have greater impact on state resources, I was talking a second about sector plans. Sector plans are underneath the state coordinated review process. At minimum, sector plans are about 15,000 acres. We have one sector plan that just was adopted this year, the Bay-Walton sector plan, which covers more than 110,000 acres. So these are pretty massive, which is why they're underneath the state coordinated review, and which is why it's such a more rigorous review process as compared to the expedited. Now, the adoption process is very similar between expedited and state reviews, except where expedited state review has a 30-day review of the adopted amendment, there's 45 days for state coordinated review. The next and final amendment review process that I mentioned was a small-scale amendment process. Now, reviewers may not usually see this one. This is primarily between DEO and the local government. Small-scale amendments are those amendments that are typically 10 acres or less, unless they're in an area that's called a rural. Unless they're in an area that's designated as a rural area opportunity, which was the previous rural areas of critical economic concern, or RACIC areas. They're underneath the READY program, which is Rural and Economic Development Initiative program. Small-scale amendments are not allowed in areas of critical state concern, going back to the fact that they do protect state resources and they're underneath the state coordinated review process. As I mentioned earlier, small-scale amendment process has small-scale amendments. You can have a cap of 120 acres per year for local governments. The biggest difference between small-scale as compared to state-coordinated and expedited is the fact there's no comment letters or reports associated with the small-scale amendment process. All that happens is that once the government adopts the small-scale amendment, it's submitted to DEO after having at least one public meeting. Now, in regard to all this review, everyone has a stake, everyone has a role during the review process. After 2011, as I identified earlier, there were changes to Section 163-3184, which defines and designates the roles of reviewing agencies. In particular, for FDOT, the role that it has in terms of reviewing comprehensive plan amendments for transportation planning is they must focus on what's called transportation resources and facilities of state importance. That means comments during either state-coordinated or expedited review from FDOT reviewers must focus on any resource or facility that's considered of state importance. Now, this term is not defined in statute. This was intended not to be defined in statute, but intended for the state agencies themselves to identify what resources were of critical importance to the state. So for FDOT, those resources that are underneath transportation resources and facilities of state importance are defined under procedure number 525-010-101-B. That is the comprehensive plan review procedure I identified earlier. That procedure identifies that those facilities that fall underneath this category for FDOT reviewers are those facilities designated underneath the National Highway System, NHS, the State Highway System, SHS, and the Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS. That means that DOT reviewers can raise comments in regards to impacts to these facilities. Those comments could affect compliance determination on comprehensive plan amendments. That means if a local government does not address a comment addressed to one of these types of facilities, that could warrant a challenge by DEO on that adopted comprehensive plan amendment. And I'm going to stop for a second. Does anyone have any questions in regards to transportation resources and facilities of state importance? Because it is technically a new term coming in from 2011.
Janine, this is Gary Sokolow, and yeah, it is a new term. And what I would like to ask you is, who determines which transportation facilities or services are truly of state importance?
Well,
you didn't think I was going to ask you an easy question.
Oh, I knew that.
I can probably help Janine a bit, if you'd like.
Go for it, Maria.
Well, when we developed the procedure, we went through a process of working with our partners on that, and internally within FDOT. And the procedure talks about those facilities that are most important. But the statute also directs that for local governments who maintain their concurrency system, they should be addressing the impact of plan amendments, specifically on the strategic intermodal system, which is the highest priority network of the department and of our partners. Those are the facilities that carry the most volume of traffic. So if you're looking at a level of priority, the strategic intermodal system is probably the highest level. But at the national level, the national highway system also has been defined as having a very higher priority in its function as well. And then the last tier would be those portions of the state highway system that are not either on the national highway system or on the strategic intermodal system. There may be some adverse impacts from the plan amendments that should also be addressed under the plan amendment process. For resources, we had a little bit of a difficulty defining transportation resources, but there we were looking at the state right-of-way, where you may not have actual infrastructure in place yet, but the right-of-way is being protected for future infrastructure. And so there's an opportunity for FDOT to also ask local governments to address the impacts to state rights of way. And those are also covered under the procedure.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? If there's no other questions, I'm going to move on. To
I got another question that came in, and that is there has been for those of people that aren't as up to date on it, they wanted to know the status of developments of regional impact. Somebody online said that they heard a rumor they were going away. Could you address that?
That's trying to figure out the best way of phrasing that, because I guess in essence you could say they are, but they're not. You still have what's called Section 380.06, which guides what qualifies as development of regional impact and how they should be developed. But the review process has been changed. And that's where I was getting at earlier, is the fact that, and this will probably be discussed in more detail when we talk about Chapter 4 in another webinar, but the review process for developments of regional impact has changed, is now underneath the comprehensive plan amendment process with the state coordinated review. And that in the past, there was a set review process underneath Section 380.06. And that allowed, after review, that the local government adopted the development for regional impact by local development order. And now it's adopted in comprehensive plan. So, but to answer the question, it's an odd question. It's not to say it's an odd question. It's a hard question to answer, because it's a yes or no. Would you agree, Maria, or am I barking up the wrong tree? Or not?
Sometimes it takes a while to figure out how to unmute yourself to answer a question. But the answer, that I've heard from you and some people, and I really posed that not so much directly from me, but for the people that might not have been following it as closely since 2011, and that is, between all the exemptions that are in the law and the dense urban land area definition, a lot of the DRIs that we used to have gone into the mode of trying to renegotiate their impacts and renegotiate their mitigation. And
right.
yeah.
And so I see what you're saying. All right, for existing developments of regional impact, I'll start calling them DRIs. A lot of them are going through what Gary is alluding to, the notice of proposed changes, or NOPCs, to revise themselves. Some have been waiting it out to see what was going on with the DRI program itself. The change that I'm talking about with the review applies to new DRIs. So, and again, that goes back to the yes or no. What also Gary's talking about is you can call the shrinking of the DRI program, because over the last 5 years, numerous exemptions have popped up for DRIs. There's exemptions tied to what's called dense urban land areas, which we would get into in Chapter 4. And there's also exemptions tied to non-dense urban land areas. And those are more in terms of infill development, downtown revitalization, and things like that. There's also exemptions depending on the type of development, whether it's sports stadium, movie theater, certain types of retail, things like that. And there's certain types of developments within comprehensive plan that would be excluded, like, for example, the rural land stewardship area overlay, which we'll talk about later on in this presentation. Those are exempt from the DRI program. So, yes, there's a lot of exemptions that basically force the DRI program into more rural areas, as well as there is now a change in how the process is done. So the DRI program is still around, DRIs are still around, but how the program was back before 2011, it's radically different. And I hope that answers the question, or at least gives some food for thought.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
And I think just following up with what Janine said, so in working with DEO, I think they're working on coming out with some guidance, but basically existing DRIs, they continue to be amended through the existing process if the developer wants to retain his DRI. Now, there are provisions in the statute that they can abandon their DRI, or if they're substantially built out, they can, again, get out of the DRI process. But if they want to retain their DRI development order, existing DRIs, they go through the 380 process, the former process. If it's a type of development that would qualify as a DRI, it's not exempt under DULAs, so exemptions continue. If they're exempt under DULAs, which are the dense urban land areas, or if they're a type of development that's exempt, they don't have to go through the DRI process, and they don't have to go through the new coordinated agency review process. But if it's a new development that meets the thresholds for DRI outside the dense land urban areas, they would have to come in through coordinated agency review. One question that came up routinely was if the development did not need a land use change because the land uses were already in place, even if it was a DRI scale development, would it have to come in through coordinated agency review? And we were somewhat surprised that initially DEO has said that yes, any development that qualifies as a DRI that would have to undergo coordinated agency review, even if the underlying land uses were in place. And again, I want to caution you all that these interpretations, because it's a new provision of statute, could change a bit with time and could be refined. But as long as it wasn't previously exempt from DRI review, it now has to go through this new process that Janine was describing, coordinated agency review. So it's somewhat complicated, as she said, and we'll see how these interpretations change over time.
Thank you so much. Is there any other questions before we move forward? Okay. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the review process before I switch gears. And it's in regards to a change that happened after 2011. So prior to 2011, when local governments wanted to amend their comprehensive plans, they can only do so twice per year. So only 2 times a year, whenever they want to do it during that year. They could send in a proposed plan amendment and go through the original comprehensive plan amendment process. After 2011, the cap on the number of proposed comprehensive plan amendments that could come in for state review was lifted to as many as a local government may want to do. This can be great except for one thing. There's also now a requirement that says that if you do not adopt the proposed amendment that you proposed after 100 days of, let me restart that. If you do not adopt the proposed comprehensive plan amendment after you received the comment letter or work report on that amendment, after 180 days, that amendment is withdrawn. So what I'm saying is, say you have a comprehensive plan amendment you made earlier in the year. You submitted it to DAO and the other reviewing agencies, got their comment. Now you must address their comment. From the time which you receive the comments from state agencies, you have 180 days not only to address their comments, but also to hold a public meeting to adopt your revised comprehensive plan amendment. If you do not do that during that time frame, your amendment is considered withdrawn and the local government will have to start over. Now, it's not all doom and gloom in regards to this. Say your local government, you had a massive comprehensive plan amendment, and you realize there is no way you're going to be able to finish all of this within 180 days. You can contact DAO and work out an agreement with them that will extend your time frame to a later date so you can get your comprehensive plan amendment in. So my advice to, as Gary noted, there's some local governments on the line, that if you're working on a comprehensive plan amendment and you feel like you don't have enough time to do it to adequate justice to address all the comments, then coordinate with DAO to go set up an agreement to set it to extend your date, because you don't want to work on a comprehensive plan amendment, not get it done correctly, and then get a challenge later on and then have to go through the chaos with remedial amendment compliance or even just withdrawing the amendment. Now, talking about the comprehensive plan amendment review process, we're going to move now into the actual review of comprehensive plan amendment. Now, there's basically 2 types of comprehensive plan amendments. There are what's called future land use maps, or flume amendments, and there's text amendments. And just to tell you quickly, a text amendment is basically an amendment to the goals, objectives, and policies within a comprehensive plan, while future land use amendment is amending the future land use map or map series associated with a comprehensive plan. Under Section 163, 3177, 6A, if you want to be a bit more specific, Florida state law requires that all local governments have to adopt a future land use map or map series. The future land use map or map series contains the vision for future development within a jurisdiction. So when a future land use map amendment comes in, it changes that vision for a particular area within a jurisdiction. And that can have impact on transportation facilities. For example, if you're changing an area from agricultural use to commercial use, you're going to generate potentially more trips. So things like that have to be digested, understood for their impact, to see how, if any, mitigation needs to be done. those points of contact. Now, when a local government submits a future land use map amendment, they have to do several things before it can even cross the threshold being transmitted to state for state review. There's 3 minimum data analysis requirements. An analysis of the availability of facilities and services that includes transportation facilities, that includes water, that includes wastewater, basically all the availability of public facilities and services for development that might be needed by development. There also has to be an analysis of suitability. Suitability analysis looks at the character of undeveloped lands, soils, topography, natural resources, and historic resources of the area that is being impacted by the future land use map amendment. And third, the future land use map amendment must identify the minimum amount of land needed for the map amendment to occur, as determined by the local government. Some submission examples you might see for a future land use map amendment may include proposed changes, as I talked about with text changes, proposed changes to goals, objectives, and policies. For example, say you're doing a future land use map amendment, but you must change the goals, objectives, and policies which control the called a future land use designation. I'm going to take a step back now. The future land use map shows what's called future land use designations or categories, and those are the land uses that are projected to guide development within a jurisdiction. So a text amendment, in terms of submission examples, could be revising that designation to add a new activity to it, to change the density of it, change the impact